Clara Jennings fell to her knees in the snow, her husband's blood still frozen on the letter they'd found in his pocket. 3 small boys stood behind her, shivering, hungry, watching their mother break. "Get out of Silver Creek," the sheriff said, his shadow falling over the fresh grave. "You got 3 days, witch, or we'll bury you next to him." She had nowhere to go. No money, no family. Just 3 sons and a dead man's promise that this land would be their home. Subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's story to the very end. Comment your city below. Let us see how far this story travels. The funeral was over before it began. Clara Jennings stood alone at the edge of the cemetery, her 3 sons pressed against her black wool skirt like frightened animals seeking shelter from a storm. The November wind cut through the threadbare fabric, but she didn't feel the cold. She couldn't feel anything anymore. Not since they'd brought Thomas home in pieces. "Mining accident," Sheriff Wade Harrison had called it. His voice had been flat, almost bored when he'd delivered the news 4 days ago. "Tunnel collapsed. Nothing anyone could have done." But Clara knew better. She'd felt the wrongness in her chest for weeks before it happened. That heavy, suffocating pressure that always came before death touched her life. She'd begged Thomas not to go into the mine that morning, begged him to stay home just one more day. He'd laughed and kissed her forehead. "You worry too much, Clara. I'll be home before supper." He wasn't. Now she stood over his grave while the town of Silver Creek watched from a distance, their whispers carried on the wind like poison. Cursed woman. Knew something bad would happen when she came here. Poor Thomas. Should have married someone normal. Clara's hands trembled, but she kept her chin high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. Not in front of her boys. "Mama," Samuel's voice, her eldest at 11, too old for the fear in his eyes. "They're all staring at us." "Let them stare," Clara said quietly. "We've done nothing wrong." "But they think—" "I don't care what they think, Samuel." She squeezed his shoulder, feeling bone beneath too thin flesh. When had her boy gotten so skinny? When had any of them last eaten a proper meal? "Your father is dead. We're going to stand here and honor him. That's all that matters." 8-year-old Elijah pressed closer to her side, silent as always, his dark eyes fixed on the wooden cross marking his father's grave. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since they'd told him about Thomas. Clara worried about that silence, about what it might be hiding. But it was 5-year-old Noah who broke her heart. "Mama," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "The man in the big hat is very sad. Sadder than us." Clara looked down at her youngest, confused. "What man, sweetheart?" Noah pointed toward the tree line at the edge of the cemetery. "The one watching. He lost someone too. I can feel it." Clara's blood went cold. She looked up, scanning the distant pines, but saw nothing. No one. "There's nobody there, Noah." "Yes, there is." The boy's voice held that strange certainty that always made Clara's skin prickle. "He's hiding, but he's there. He's been watching since we got here." Before Clara could respond, footsteps crunched through the snow behind her. Heavy boots, deliberate pace. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Mrs. Jennings." Sheriff Wade Harrison stepped up beside her, his silver badge catching the weak winter light. He was a large man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that might have been handsome once before. Cruelty hardened it into something else. "Sheriff?" Clara kept her voice neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Funeral's over," Harrison said. "Time to discuss your situation." "My situation is that I just buried my husband. Surely whatever business you have can wait." Harrison's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Afraid not, ma'am. See, there's the matter of your property." Clara finally turned to face him, positioning herself between the sheriff and her children. Samuel moved to stand beside her, his small hands clenched into fists. "Our property is paid for," Clara said. "Thomas filed the deed himself at the county office. Did he now? Harrison scratched his chin thoughtfully. Funny thing about that. Seems the county office had a small fire last month. Lot of records got damaged, including, wouldn't you know it, the Jennings property deed. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. That's impossible. Afraid not. Without proper documentation, that land reverts to the territory, and the territory's already got a buyer lined up. Harrison's eyes glittered with something dark. Mr. Blackwood's been generous enough to offer fair market value for the parcel. Cornelius Blackwood. Clara spat the name like a curse. He's been trying to buy our land for months. Thomas refused. Well, Thomas ain't here to refuse anymore, is he? Samuel lunged forward, but Clara caught him, pulling him back against her. Don't, she whispered fiercely. Don't give him a reason. Harrison watched the exchange with amusement. Smart woman. Smarter than your husband anyway. He should have taken Mr. Blackwood's offer when he had the chance. What's that supposed to mean? The sheriff's smile widened. Means accidents happen, Mrs. Jennings, especially to folks who don't know when to let go of something that ain't theirs. Clara felt the words like a physical blow. Her suspicion, the dark knowing that had lived in her chest since Thomas's death, suddenly crystallized into terrible certainty. You, she breathed. You killed him. Harrison's expression didn't change. Mining accident. Tunnel collapsed. That's what the report says, and that's what happened. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. 3 days, Mrs. Jennings. Pack up whatever you can carry and get out of Silver Creek. Take those boys of yours somewhere far away. And if I don't... Harrison glanced at Samuel, at Elijah, at little Noah, still clutching Clara's skirt. Be a shame if something happened to them too. Mining accidents, falling off horses, children wandering into the wilderness and getting lost. He shrugged. Dangerous territory out here. Anything can happen. Clara's whole body went rigid with fury and terror. You wouldn't. 3 days, Harrison repeated. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. My condolences for your loss, ma'am. He walked away, boots crunching through the snow, leaving Clara standing over her husband's grave with murder in her heart and nowhere to turn. Mama, Samuel's voice was shaking. What are we going to do? Clara looked at her 3 sons. Samuel trying so hard to be brave. Elijah silent and watching. Noah, whose strange gift saw things no child should see. We're going to survive, she said. That's what we're going to do. 3 miles away, Jacob Mercer lowered his field glasses and urged his horse deeper into the tree line. He shouldn't have been watching. Shouldn't have ridden out here at all. The funeral of a man he'd never met was none of his business. The widow left behind was none of his concern. But something had pulled him here today. The same instinct that had kept him alive through a decade of hunting outlaws, that had warned him of ambushes and betrayals, that had failed him only twice in his life, both times with catastrophic consequences. He'd watched the woman stand rigid as the townspeople whispered and pointed. Watched her shield her children with her own body. Watched the sheriff threaten her over a fresh grave while she faced him down with nothing but fury and fear. Jacob recognized that combination. He'd worn it himself 5 years ago when he'd stood over 2 small graves and wanted to burn the whole world down. None of your business, he muttered to himself, turning his horse toward home. She's got family somewhere, friends. She'll figure it out. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He'd seen the way the townspeople looked at her, heard the word they whispered, cursed. In Silver Creek, that word was a death sentence. It meant no one would sell to her, hire her, or help her. It meant she and those 3 boys would starve or freeze before Christmas. Jacob rode on the woman's face, pale and defiant, in the gray winter light burned into his memory. Not your problem, he told himself. You've got enough ghosts. The Mercer ranch appeared through the pines, smoke rising from the chimney he'd left banked that morning. The house was well-built, solid log walls, and a stone fireplace, room enough for a family that no longer existed. Sarah had loved this place. She'd planted flowers by the door, hung curtains in the windows, filled the rooms with her laughter and William's endless questions. Now the flowers were dead, the curtains faded, and the only sound was the wind whistling through gaps in the boards Jacob couldn't bring himself to repair. He stabled his horse with mechanical efficiency, then stood in the doorway of his empty house, unable to make himself go inside. 3 years. 3 years since the fever had taken Sarah and William while Jacob tracked a gang of cattle thieves 200 miles away. 3 years since he'd ridden home to find fresh graves where his family should have been. "You weren't there," the familiar voice whispered in his head. "When they needed you most, you were chasing outlaws who didn't matter, playing hero while your wife died calling your name." Jacob closed his eyes, breathing through the pain that never dulled, never faded, never gave him a moment's peace. He should sell this place, right away, and never look back. But he couldn't. This was where Sarah had laughed, where William had taken his first steps, where they'd planned a future that would never come. Leaving felt like abandoning them all over again. "Coward," the voice said. "Can't move forward, can't go back. Just existing in purgatory, waiting for something that'll never come." Jacob pulled himself inside and built up the fire more out of habit than any desire for warmth. He ate cold beans from a can, not tasting them. Lit a lamp as darkness fell, though he had nothing to do by its light. Through the window he could see the distant glow of Silver Creek 2 hours' ride to the east. Somewhere out there a widow with 3 children was facing her first night as prey. "Not your problem." He repeated it like a prayer, like a shield against the pull he felt toward a woman he'd never met. "You couldn't save Sarah. Couldn't save William. What makes you think you can save anyone?" Jacob pulled out his old marshal's badge, turning it over in his calloused fingers. The silver was tarnished now, the engraving worn smooth. He hadn't worn it in 5 years, not since the day a bullet meant for an outlaw had killed an innocent child instead. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jacob Mercer, deadshot fearless lawman, protector of the territory. The man who couldn't protect the people who mattered most. He put the badge away and tried to sleep, but the woman's face followed him into his dreams. Morning broke gray and bitter. Clara had slept in her clothes pressed between Samuel and Elijah on the narrow bed that had once held her and Thomas. Noah had crawled in sometime during the night, shivering despite the extra blankets, and now lay curled against her chest like a small animal seeking warmth. The fire had died hours ago. Frost crept up the inside of the windows. The cabin Thomas had been building when he died remained half-finished, walls complete, but roof only partially covered gaps in the boards, letting in wind and weather. They'd made it through the summer and fall in this half-shelter. Winter would kill them. Clara eased herself out from between her children, tucking blankets around them, before moving to the cold hearth. Their wood supply was running low. The flour bin was nearly empty. The last of the salt pork had gone into yesterday's thin soup. 3 days. Harrison had given her 3 days to leave. But leave to where? She had no family, left no friends in the territory, no money to travel. Everything she owned was here in this frozen valley, on land that men were willing to kill for. "Thomas, what am I going to do?" The question echoed in the silent cabin unanswered. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside to gather what firewood remained in their small stack. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing the breath from her lungs. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the muddy yard in pristine white. Beautiful, she thought bitterly. Beautiful and deadly. She was reaching for the first log when she heard it. Hoofbeats muffled by snow, but unmistakable, coming up the path toward the cabin. Clara's hand found the axe leaning against the woodpile. She gripped the handle and turned to face whatever new threat was approaching. The rider emerged from the tree line, a dark figure on a bay horse hat, pulled low against the wind. For one terrible moment, Clara thought it was Harrison come to make good on his threats ahead of schedule. But this man sat differently in the saddle. Taller, leaner, with a stillness about him that spoke of patience rather than aggression. As he drew closer, she could see his face beneath the hat brim, hard-featured, weathered by sun and sorrow, with eyes that held the same hollow emptiness she saw in her own mirror each morning. He reined in his horse 20 feet from the cabin, making no move to dismount. His gaze swept over the half-finished structure, the meager woodpile, the woman standing alone with an axe in her white-knuckled grip. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, rough from disuse. "Who are you?" Clara demanded. "What do you want?" "Name's Mercer. Jacob Mercer." He nodded toward the cabin. "Saw your place from the ridge. Looks like you could use some help with that roof." Clara's eyes narrowed. "I don't know you." "No, ma'am. Then why would you help me?" Jacob was silent for a long moment, his breath fogging in the cold air. "I was at the cemetery yesterday," he said finally. "Saw what happened with the sheriff." Clara's grip on the axe tightened. "You were watching us." "I was." No apology in his tone. "Saw you stand up to him when any sane person would have run. Saw those boys of yours trying to protect you." His eyes met hers directly. "Reminded me of someone I used to know." "Who?" "My wife." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara studied him more carefully now, the lines of grief carved into his face, the wedding ring still on his finger, the way he looked at her children with something that might have been recognition. "You lost her," Clara said quietly. 3 years ago." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Her and our boy. Fever took them while I was away. I'm sorry." He nodded once, accepting the condolence without wallowing in it. "Point is, I know what it's like to be alone when the world's trying to bury you. Wouldn't wish that on anyone." The cabin door creaked open behind Clara. Samuel emerged, rifle in hand, positioning himself at his mother's side. "Who is he?" the boy demanded. "What does he want?" Jacob looked at the young face, so serious, so determined to protect despite his fear. "I'm nobody's son, just a man with some timber and too much time." "We don't need charity," Samuel said stiffly. "Good thing I ain't offering any." Jacob finally dismounted, but kept his distance, letting them adjust to his presence. "Your mama's got her hands full with you 3 boys and winter coming. I've got lumber rotting in my barn and skills gathering dust." He shrugged. "Seems like a fair trade. I help finish this cabin, and when spring comes, your brother there can help me with some hauling." Samuel looked uncertain, glancing at Clara for guidance. She should refuse. Should tell this stranger to leave, that they didn't need help from anyone. Pride demanded it. Survival did too. In her experience, men who offered help always wanted something in return. But then she thought of Noah's small body shivering against hers through the night, of Elijah's hollow cheeks, of Samuel's thin shoulders trying to carry a man's burden. 3 days until Harrison came for them, and here was a man with strong hands and sad eyes offering to help finish the walls that might keep her children alive. "Why?" Clara asked one last test. "The whole town thinks I'm cursed. They say I bring death wherever I go. Aren't you afraid?" Jacob's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I've spent the last 3 years wishing death would come for me. Seems like you and I got nothing to fear from each other." The honesty of it struck her like a blow. Not self-pity, not dramatics, just the simple truth of a man who had given up on his own future. Clara made her decision. "The roof needs the most work," she said. "And the north wall has gaps you could fit your fist through." Jacob nodded. "I'll bring tools and timber tomorrow at dawn." He moved toward his horse, then paused. "Mrs. Jennings." "Yes." "That Sheriff Harrison." Jacob's voice hardened. "He give you a deadline?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. 3 days. Something dark flickered in Jacob's eyes. "Then we'd best work fast." He mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the trees as silently as he'd come. Samuel stared after him, rifle still gripped tight. "Mama, can we trust him?" Clara thought of the way Jacob had looked at her children, the wedding ring on his finger, the pain in his voice when he spoke of his dead wife and son. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we have to try." From the doorway, Noah's small voice drifted out to them. "He's coming back, Mama. I saw it. He's going to help us fight the bad men." Clara turned to find her youngest, standing in the doorway, his strange gray eyes distant with that look she'd come to dread, the look that meant he was seeing something beyond the present moment. "What bad men, sweetheart?" Noah blinked, coming back to himself. "The ones who killed Papa," he said simply. "The man in the big hat is going to help us stop them." Clara's blood went cold. She'd never told Noah about the sheriff's involvement in Thomas's death, had never spoken her suspicions aloud to anyone. But her son knew anyway, because Noah saw things, felt things just like she did. And now he'd seen their future intertwined with a grieving stranger's. Clara pulled her youngest into her arms, holding him tight against the cold, and the fear, and the terrible uncertainty of what lay ahead. 3 days, until Harrison came for them. And somehow, impossibly help had arrived in the form of a broken man who had nothing left to lose. Thomas, she thought, staring at the tree line where Jacob Mercer had vanished. "What have you gotten us into?" The only answer was the wind whistling through the gaps in walls that might yet become a home. True to his word, Jacob Mercer arrived at dawn. Clara heard the hoofbeats before the sun had fully crested the ridge, and she was waiting on the porch when he emerged from the tree line. This time, his horse pulled a small sled loaded with timber tools and supplies she couldn't begin to identify. Samuel stood beside her, rifle in hand, as always now. The boy had slept with it last night, refusing to let it out of his sight. Clara hadn't argued. After Harrison's threats, she understood the need to feel some measure of control, however illusory. Jacob dismounted and began unloading without preamble. No pleasantries, no small talk. Just work. "Boy," he said to Samuel, not unkindly, "you know how to use a saw." Samuel straightened. "My pa taught me." "Good. We'll start with the roof joists. Your mama can hand up the boards once we've got the frame set." Clara bristled at being assigned a task in her own home, but swallowed her pride. The man was here to help. She could tolerate his manner if it meant her children survived the winter. They worked in near silence for the first hour. Jacob moved with quiet efficiency, measuring twice, cutting once, his hands steady and sure despite the bitter cold. He showed Samuel how to brace the joints properly, how to angle the cuts so water would run off instead of pooling. The boy absorbed every lesson with fierce concentration, determined to prove himself useful. Elijah emerged around mid-morning, drawn by the sound of hammering. He hung back at first, watching from the doorway, with those dark, observant eyes. Then, without a word, he picked up a handful of nails and began sorting them by size. Jacob noticed. "That your middle boy?" Clara nodded. "Elijah. He doesn't talk much." "Nothing wrong with quiet." Jacob accepted a sorted handful of nails from the boy. "Thank you, son." Elijah didn't respond, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. It was Noah who finally broke the careful silence. The youngest Jennings had been watching Jacob all morning with an intensity that made Clara nervous. Now he marched across the frozen yard, planted himself directly in the man's path, and looked up with those strange gray eyes. "You're sad," Noah announced. "Really, really sad. Like there's a hole inside you where something used to be." Clara's heart stopped. "Noah." But Jacob had gone very still, his hammer frozen mid-swing. He looked down at the small boy with an expression Clara couldn't read. "That's so." His voice was rough. "Your wife had yellow hair." Noah continued as if discussing the weather. "And your little boy liked horses. He wanted to be just like you when he grew up." The hammer dropped from Jacob's hand. Clara rushed forward, grabbing Noah and pulling him back. "I'm so sorry. He says things sometimes. He doesn't mean, how does he know that?" Jacob's voice was barely above a whisper. "How does he know about Sarah's hair, about William?" Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. How could she explain what she barely understood herself? How could she tell this stranger that her son saw things he shouldn't, knew things he couldn't just like she did? He's just a child. She finally managed. Children say strange things. Jacob's eyes moved from Noah to Clara, and she saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "You feel things," he said slowly. "Both of you. Things other people don't." Clara went cold. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Jacob picked up his hammer, but didn't resume working. "The townspeople call you cursed. They whisper about you seeing death before it comes." His gaze was steady, probing. "Is it true?" Every instinct screamed at Clara to deny it. To laugh it off, change the subject, protect herself the way she always had. But something in Jacob's face stopped her. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't disgusted. He was simply asking with the directness of a man who had no patience left for lies. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Sometimes I feel when something terrible is coming. Not clearly, just pressure and dreams." She pulled Noah closer. "He's the same but different. He doesn't see death. He sees other things, feelings, paths." She waited for Jacob to recoil, to make his excuses and ride away, leaving them alone with their strangeness. Instead, he nodded once and turned back to the roof. "My grandmother was the same," he said, driving a nail with practiced precision. "Knew things she shouldn't. Saved my grandfather's life twice with her warnings." Another nail. "Some folks called her witch. Others called her blessed. She just called it paying attention to what most people ignore." Clara stared at him, stunned into silence. "Your boy's gift isn't a curse, Mrs. Jennings." Jacob looked down at Noah, and for the first time, something like warmth flickered in his eyes. "And neither is yours." Noah beamed up at him. "I knew you'd understand. I saw it." Despite everything, Clara felt the corners of her mouth twitch. "You see quite a lot for someone so small." "I'm almost 6, Noah said with dignity. "That's practically grown up." A sound escaped Jacob's throat. It took Clara a moment to realize it was a laugh, rusty and brief, as if he'd forgotten how to make it. The tension broke like ice in spring. They returned to work, but something had changed. The silence between them was easier now, companionable rather than wary. When Samuel made a mistake with the saw, Jacob corrected him without criticism. When Elijah brought water from the well, Jacob thanked him by name. By midday, half the roof was properly covered. Clara called a halt for food such as it was. Thin soup stretched with the last of their potatoes, hard bread that required soaking to chew. She was embarrassed to offer it to a guest, but Jacob ate without complaint, sitting on an overturned bucket while the boys crowded around him. "Mr. Mercer," Samuel asked through a mouthful of bread, "were you really a lawman?" Clara shot her son a warning look, but Jacob didn't seem offended. "Was," he confirmed. "Deputy U.S. Marshal for about 10 years. "What happened?" "Samuel," Clara said sharply. "That's not polite." But Jacob shook his head. "It's all right. Boy deserves to know who's helping his family." He set down his bowl, his expression going distant. "I made a mistake. Cost someone their life. Couldn't wear the badge after that." Samuel's eyes widened. "You killed someone." "Not on purpose, but that didn't matter much to the family of the person who died." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Sometimes doing your best isn't good enough. Sometimes people get hurt anyway, and you've got to live with that." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara suspected went far deeper than he was saying. "Pa used to say that—" Elijah spoke, suddenly startling everyone. "That you can do everything right and still lose. But you keep trying anyway, because that's what good people do." Jacob looked at the quiet boy for a long moment. "Your pa sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Elijah's voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. He was the best pa in the world, and someone killed him for no reason. The words crashed through the fragile peace like a rock through glass. Clara's breath caught. Elijah had never spoken about Thomas's death before, hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't asked questions, hadn't done anything but retreat into that impenetrable silence. Now he sat with his small hands clenched in his lap, trembling with rage and grief too big for his young body. "Elijah," Clara whispered, reaching for him. "It's true." The boy pulled away. "I heard Sheriff Harrison talking to Mr. Blackwood outside the general store, before Pa died. They said Pa was being stubborn, and they'd have to do something about it." His voice cracked. 3 days later, Pa was dead. Jacob's whole body had gone taut. "You're sure about what you heard, son?" Elijah nodded fiercely. "I wanted to tell Mama, but I thought maybe I heard wrong. Maybe they didn't mean—" He broke off, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "It's my fault. I should have told someone. I should have warned him." Clara gathered her son into her arms, her own tears falling. "No. No, sweetheart. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." But even as she comforted him, her mind was racing. Elijah had heard Harrison and Blackwood plotting. A child's testimony might not hold up in court, but it confirmed everything she'd suspected. Thomas's death hadn't been an accident. It had been murder cold and calculated, ordered by the man who wanted their land. She looked up to find Jacob watching her, and in his eyes she saw the same cold fury that burned in her own chest. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "after the boys are in bed." Clara nodded, understanding. Some conversations weren't meant for children's ears. They worked through the afternoon with renewed intensity, as if physical labor could burn away the horror of what Elijah had revealed. By sunset, the roof was complete. No more gaps, no more wind whistling through. For the first time since Thomas's death, the cabin felt like shelter instead of a trap. Jacob helped Samuel stack the leftover timber against the north wall, then stood back to survey their work. "Should hold through winter," he said. "Tomorrow we'll start on the inside. Get some proper chinking in those gaps, maybe build out that fireplace so it throws more heat." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for everything he'd done, but Clara didn't know how else to express it. "I don't know how to repay you." "Don't want repayment." Jacob pulled on his gloves, preparing to ride. "Just want to see those boys survive to spring." Clara watched him mount his horse, a question burning on her tongue. She shouldn't ask, shouldn't push, but the words came anyway. "Why do you really care what happens to us?" Jacob was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice low and rough, he said, 3 years ago, I rode home from a job to find my wife and son buried in the ground. The whole town knew they were sick. Not one person rode out to tell me. Not one person stayed to help them." His hands tightened on the reins. "I swore I'd never be like them, never watch someone suffer when I could do something about it." He rode away before Clara could respond, his figure swallowed by the gathering dusk. That night, after the boys were finally asleep, Clara sat by the fire with Thomas's journal in her lap. She'd found it hidden beneath the floorboards 2 days after his death, tucked away like he'd known she might need it. Most of the entries were mundane. Notes about the cabin's construction, records of supplies purchased, sketches of the land he'd hoped to farm. But the last few pages were different. She read them again, now heart aching. November 3rd. Blackwood came by again today, offered twice what the land is worth. When I refused, he got this look on his face. Cold, like I was already dead, and he was just waiting for my body to catch up. Clara's been having those feelings again, the bad ones. She begged me not to go to the mine tomorrow, but what choice do I have? We need the money. I'll be careful. November 4th. Something's wrong. Harrison stopped me on the road, said, "Blackwood wants to meet at the North Ridge tomorrow. Discuss a compromise," he said. "I don't trust it, but if there's a chance to settle this peacefully, I have to try." Not telling Clara. She'll only worry. November 5th. If you're reading this, something went wrong. The map of the silver vein is hidden in Noah's wooden horse. I found it 3 months ago. That's why they want the land. Not for farming, for what's underneath. Don't trust Harrison. Don't trust Blackwood. Get the boys somewhere safe. And the entry ended mid-sentence. Whatever Thomas had meant to write, he'd never gotten the chance. A knock at the door made Clara jump, heart racing. "It's Mercer," came Jacob's voice through the wood. "We need to talk. Now." Clara opened the door to find him standing in the darkness, his expression grim. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Riders." Jacob stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind him. "Saw them from the ridge on my way home. 8 men heading this direction, moving slow like they don't want to be heard." Clara's blood went cold. "Harrison." "Most likely." Jacob's hand rested on his gun belt. "They're not coming to talk, Mrs. Jennings. Not with that many men, not at this hour." "But he said 3 days. We still have—" "Men like Harrison don't keep their word." Jacob was already moving, checking the windows, testing the new door's strength. "Where's your rifle?" "By the bed. Samuel has his father's." "Get the boys up, quietly. Is there anywhere they can hide?" Clara thought frantically. "There's a root cellar, small but— Show me." She led him to the corner of the cabin, pulling back the worn rug to reveal a trapdoor barely visible in the rough floorboards. The space beneath was cramped and dark, but large enough for 3 small boys to hide. "This'll do." Jacob tested the trapdoor, nodded in satisfaction. "Get them down there. Tell them not to make a sound no matter what they hear. Understand?" Clara was already shaking Samuel awake, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. Boys, wake up. We have to play a hiding game." Elijah came alert instantly, his dark eyes understanding far too much. He helped Noah into his coat without questions, keeping his little brother calm even as fear showed in every line of his body. Samuel gripped his rifle. "I'm not hiding. I'm staying with you." "No." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "You're protecting your brothers. That's the most important job. Can you do that for me?" The boy's jaw trembled, but he nodded. One by one, she lowered them into the cellar. Noah clung to her neck, whimpering. "Mama, the bad men are coming. I can feel them. They're angry, so angry." "I know, sweetheart." Clara kissed his forehead. "But Mr. Mercer is here, and we're going to be fine. You just stay quiet and take care of your brothers." She closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, her heart shattering into pieces. Jacob handed her Thomas's rifle. "You know how to use this." "Thomas taught me." "Good. Stay away from the windows. If they get past me—" "They won't." Clara checked the rifle's chamber with hands that had stopped shaking. "Because I'll be standing beside you, not hiding behind you." Jacob looked at her for a long moment. Then incredibly he smiled. Just a small thing, barely a twitch of his lips, but real. "Your husband was a lucky man," he said quietly. Before Clara could respond, hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Many hoofbeats coming fast now that secrecy no longer mattered. Jacob moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. 8 riders. Harrison's in front. They've got torches. Clara joined him, her stomach dropping at the sight of flames bobbing through the trees. "What do we do?" "First, we give them a chance to turn around." Jacob's voice was calm, almost cold. "Then if they don't, we do what we have to." He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between the cabin and the approaching riders. Clara followed, rifle raised, standing at his shoulder. The riders reined in 20 feet from the cabin, their torches casting dancing shadows across the snow. Harrison sat at their head, his badge gleaming in the firelight. "Well, well," the sheriff's voice dripped with mock surprise. "Mercer, didn't expect to find you here." "Then you weren't paying attention." Jacob's hand rested on his gun, easy but ready. "Turn around, Harrison. Take your men and go home." Harrison laughed. Now why would I do that? I'm here on official business. The widow's being evicted. She's got 2 more days by your own count. Plans change. Harrison's eyes moved to Clara. Should have left when you had the chance, which? Now we're going to have to do this the hard way. There doesn't have to be a hard way. Jacob's voice was steady. Whatever Blackwood's paying you, it's not worth dying for. One of the men behind Harrison shifted nervously. Another muttered something under his breath. Who said anything about dying? Harrison's smile turned ugly. Way I see it, we're 8 against 1.5. Your gun arm's good, Mercer, but it ain't that good. Try me. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but something in Jacob's tone made 2 of the riders actually back their horses up. Harrison noticed. His face darkened with anger. Don't be stupid. You're not a marshal anymore. You've got no authority here, no backup, nothing. Walk away now, and we'll forget we saw you. Can't do that. Why the hell not? Jacob glanced at Clara, then back at Harrison. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when you know you might lose. For a long moment, no one moved. The torches crackled in the silence. Snow began to fall soft and steady, catching the firelight like drifting sparks. Then Harrison drew his gun. Clara moved without thinking. She stepped in front of Jacob's rifle, raised her voice ringing out across the frozen yard. You shoot him, you'd better shoot me too. And then you'd better explain to the whole territory how a sheriff and 8 deputies murdered an unarmed widow defending her home. Harrison's gun wavered. Get out of the way. No. Clara's finger found the trigger. My husband is dead. My children are orphans. I've got nothing left to lose, Sheriff. Can you say the same? Behind Harrison, another rider peeled away, riding hard back toward town. Then another. The nervous murmurs grew louder. This ain't what we signed up for, someone muttered. Blackwood said it'd be easy, said she'd run. Shut up, Harrison snarled. But his confidence was cracking. He could see his support melting away into the snowy night. Jacob stepped up beside Clara, his presence solid and reassuring. It's over, Harrison. Your men know it. You know it. Ride away now, and maybe we can all pretend this never happened. The sheriff's face contorted with rage. For one terrible moment, Clara was certain he would fire anyway, consequences be damned. Then his gun lowered. This isn't over, Harrison said, his voice shaking with fury. You think you've won something here? Blackwood owns this valley. He owns the bank, the mine, the judge. You've got nothing. We've got each other, Clara said quietly. That's more than you'll ever have. Harrison spat in the snow at her feet. Then he wheeled his horse and rode away, the remaining deputies following in his wake. Clara watched until the last torchlight disappeared into the trees. Only then did she allow herself to sag the rifle, suddenly impossibly heavy in her hands. They'll be back, Jacob said. I know. Probably with more men. Probably with a legal excuse to do what they wanted to do tonight. I know. Clara looked up at him. But not tonight. Tonight my boys are safe. She went to the hidden trapdoor and opened it. 3 small faces looked up at her, tear-streaked and terrified. It's over, she said, reaching for them. They're gone. You're safe. Samuel climbed out first, then turned to help his brothers. When all 3 boys were standing in the cabin, they threw themselves at Clara, clinging to her like drowning men to driftwood. Mama, Noah whispered against her neck. The man in the big hat saved us, just like I said he would. Clara looked over her children's heads at Jacob Mercer standing alone in the doorway, with snow in his hair and grief in his eyes. Yes, she said softly. He did. Jacob nodded once, then turned to go. Where are you going? Samuel asked, his voice sharp with alarm. Home. Storm's coming. You'll be safe tonight. Jacob paused at the door. I'll be back at dawn. Wait. Clara gently disentangled herself from her sons and crossed to him. You should stay. The weather's turning, and after what just happened. Wouldn't be proper. But Jacob's eyes lingered on the boys on the warm fire on the roof he'd helped build. People talk enough about you already. People can go to hell. The profanity startled them both. Clara felt color rise to her cheeks, but she didn't take it back. Stay, please. The boys need to know you're here, and frankly, so do I. Jacob was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would refuse. Then slowly, he removed his hat. I'll sleep in the lean-to, he said. With the horse. You'll sleep by the fire like a civilized person. Clara pointed to the corner where she'd piled extra blankets. The boys and I will take the bed. End of discussion. Something flickered in Jacob's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. That night, for the first time since Thomas's death, Clara slept without nightmares. The cabin was warm, her children were safe, and in the corner by the dying fire, a good man kept watch over them all. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the tracks of violence with a blanket of white. Inside, the first fragile threads of trust began to weave themselves into something stronger. Morning came gray and bitter, but Clara woke to warmth. The fire was already burning strong. Jacob sat beside it, feeding small logs into the flames with the quiet efficiency she was beginning to recognize as his way. He looked up when she stirred, nodded once, then returned his attention to the fire. Coffee's on, he said. Such as it is. Clara sat up carefully, not wanting to wake the boys, still tangled together on the narrow bed. You didn't have to do that. Couldn't sleep anyway. Jacob poured dark liquid into a tin cup and held it out to her. Storm passed. Roads should be clear. Clara accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold fingers around the cup's warmth. The bitter taste was almost pleasant, a reminder of normal mornings before everything fell apart. What happens now? She asked quietly. Jacob was silent for a moment. Now we figure out what Blackwood's really after, and we find a way to stop him before Harrison comes back with legal papers and a bigger posse. You sound like you've done this before. Spent 10 years chasing men who thought they were above the law. Jacob's jaw tightened. Blackwood's no different. He's just got more money and better lawyers. Clara thought of Thomas's journal still hidden beneath the floorboards. The silver vein. The map concealed in Noah's wooden horse. Everything her husband had died for. There's something you should know, she said. Something Thomas found before he died. She told him everything. The journal entries, the silver discovery, the map Thomas had hidden to protect. As she spoke, Jacob's expression grew darker, his hands stilling on the firewood. Silver, he said when she finished. That explains why Blackwood wants the land so badly. That explains all of it. What do you mean all of it? Jacob stood pacing to the window. Your husband isn't the first to die conveniently after refusing to sell to Blackwood. I've heard rumors since I came to this valley. Accidents, mishaps, widows suddenly discovering debts they didn't know about. Clara's blood chilled. How many? Don't know for certain, but enough that it can't be coincidence. He turned to face her. Dr. Price in town, she might know more. She certifies all the deaths in the territory. Adelaide Price. Clara shook her head. She won't help us. She's part of this town, and this town wants me gone. She lost her son 3 years ago. Mining accident. Jacob's voice was flat. Same mine Blackwood owns. Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. You think Blackwood killed her son too? I think if we can show her what we know, she might be willing to share what she knows. Jacob reached for his coat. I need to go to town. Talk to some people. See if there's anyone else willing to stand against Blackwood. You'll be careful. The question came out more urgent than Clara intended. She felt heat rise to her cheeks but didn't look away. Jacob paused, his hand on the door. Something softened in his expression. I'll be careful, he said. Keep the boys inside today. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know. Jacob. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way his surname never had. Last night when Harrison came, you could have ridden away, should have. You had no reason to risk your life for us. Had every reason. Jacob's voice was rough. Some things are worth fighting for, even when you might lose. Your boys reminded me of that. He left before she could respond, his figure disappearing into the pale morning light. Clara stood at the window watching until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned to find Samuel awake and staring at her with knowing eyes. You like him, the boy said. Not accusation, just observation. Clara felt her cheeks flush. He's helping us, that's all. Pa's only been gone a month, Mama. The words hit like a slap. Clara sank onto the bed beside her eldest son, taking his hands in hers. Samuel, listen to me. Your father was a good man. The best man I ever knew. Nothing will ever change that, and nothing will ever make me forget him. She squeezed his fingers. But Mr. Mercer isn't trying to replace your pa. He's just trying to help us survive. Then why do you look at him like that? Clara didn't have an answer. How could she explain to an 11-year-old boy the complicated tangle of grief and gratitude, and something else, something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely? I don't know, she said honestly. But I do know that your father would want us to live, to be safe, to have people in our corner. She touched Samuel's cheek. Can you trust me on that? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. I trust you, Mama, but I'm still watching him. Despite everything, Clara smiled. That's fair. The day passed slowly. Clara kept the boys occupied with chores, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Elijah helped her mend clothes, while Noah practiced his letters on a slate Thomas had bought him last spring. Samuel sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the road with fierce vigilance. It was late afternoon when the sound of approaching horses made them all freeze. 3 riders, Samuel reported, squinting through the glass. Coming from town. Clara's heart hammered. Had Harrison returned? Were they too late? But as the riders drew closer, she recognized Jacob's tall figure on his bay horse. Beside him rode a woman in a dark coat, her gray hair swept back beneath a practical bonnet. The third rider was a black man Clara didn't recognize, broad-shouldered and watchful. It's Mr. Mercer, Samuel said, relief evident in his voice. He brought people. Clara opened the door as the riders dismounted. Jacob nodded to her, then stepped aside to introduce his companions. Mrs. Jennings, this is Dr. Adelaide Price, and Ezekiel Brown. He owns the Silver Spur Saloon in town. Dr. Price stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's thin frame and worn dress with professional assessment. Mrs. Jennings, I should have come sooner. Should have reached out after your husband died. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. I was a coward, and I apologize for it. Clara didn't know what to say. This was the first time anyone from Silver Creek had spoken to her with anything approaching sympathy. Why now? She managed. Dr. Price and Ezekiel exchanged glances. It was Ezekiel who answered. Because Jacob told us what you know about Blackwood, about the silver, about the accidents. His voice was deep and measured. We've suspected for years, but nobody wanted to be first to speak up, too scared of what Blackwood might do. What changed? You did. Dr. Price's eyes glistened. When I heard how you stood on your porch last night and faced down Harrison's men, I felt ashamed. A woman alone with 3 children, braver than the whole damn town. She took Clara's hands. My son Marcus died in that mine 3 years ago. They called it an accident, but I knew. I always knew. Clara felt tears prick her own eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I for yours. Dr. Price squeezed her fingers. But I didn't come here to exchange grief. I came to fight. They gathered inside around the small table, the 3 boys listening from the corner. Clara brought out Thomas's journal and showed them the final entries. Dr. Price read them with growing fury, her knuckles white against the leather binding. That bastard, she whispered. That cold-blooded bastard. He's been killing for years, and we all just looked the other way. Not anymore, Ezekiel said. I've kept records. Every suspicious death, every property that changed hands afterward, every payment I've seen Walsh receive from Blackwood's people. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. It's all here. Names, dates, amounts. Jacob studied the document, his expression grim. This is enough to hang them both, if we can get it to the right people. The territorial marshal, Dr. Price suggested, or the federal court in Denver. Too far, too slow. Jacob shook his head. By the time anyone got here, Blackwood would have burned this place down and buried the evidence. He looked at Clara. We need to force a confrontation. Make him show his hand in front of witnesses. How? The silver. Jacob's eyes were hard. We use the one thing he wants more than anything. We let it be known that Mrs. Jennings has proof of the vein's location, and she's planning to file a claim at the county office tomorrow. Clara understood immediately. Draw him out. Make him come to us. It's risky, Ezekiel warned. Blackwood won't come alone. He'll bring Harrison and every gun he can buy. Then we need guns of our own. Jacob turned to the older man. Who else in town might stand with us? Ezekiel considered. The Miller family lost their farm last year. Frank's been itching for payback. The Wilson brothers, too. Their daddy was one of Blackwood's victims, even if nobody could prove it. That's maybe 7 or 8 men. Not enough to match Blackwood's resources. It might be enough if we're smart about it. Dr. Price leaned forward. Blackwood's power comes from fear. The whole town's afraid to stand against him because they think they're alone. But if they see others standing up, if they see there's a chance of winning, some of them might find their courage. Clara thought of the deputies who had ridden away last night. The doubt in their eyes as they watched Harrison threaten a widow and her children. She's right, Clara said. Harrison's men weren't unified. Some of them didn't want to be there. If we can show the town that Blackwood isn't invincible, that there's another choice. We might just start a revolution, Jacob finished. He was looking at her with something like admiration. You're willing to risk that. Put yourself out there as bait. Clara met his gaze steadily. My husband died for this land. My children nearly died for it. I'm done running, done hiding, done being afraid. Her voice hardened. If Blackwood wants this property, he's going to have to take it over my dead body. Mama. Noah's small voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to look at the youngest Jennings boy standing in the corner with his wooden horse clutched to his chest. What is it, sweetheart? Noah walked slowly toward the table, his strange gray eyes distant with that look Clara had learned to recognize. The bad man is coming. The one with the white hair and the cold eyes. He's planning something terrible. Dr. Price looked startled. White hair. That's Blackwood. He's not going to wait. Noah continued, his voice eerily calm. He knows you're gathering people. He knows you're going to fight. He wants to stop you before you can. How do you know this? Ezekiel asked, bewildered. I see things sometimes. Noah looked at Clara. The way Mama does, but different. I see what people feel, what they're planning. His small face crumpled with fear. Mama, he's so angry. He's going to hurt people. Tonight. Jacob knelt to the boy's level. Can you tell us anything else, son? Anything that might help? Noah closed his eyes, concentrating. Lots of men. More than last night. They're meeting at the big house on the hill. The one with the iron gate. His voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Blackwood says if they can't have the land, nobody will. He's going to burn everything. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Tonight, Clara breathed. He's coming tonight. Jacob stood, his face hard as stone. Then we don't have time for elaborate plans. We need to get word to everyone now, gather whoever's willing to stand and make this cabin defensible. I'll ride to the Millers, Ezekiel said, already reaching for his coat. They'll spread the word to others. I'll go to town, Dr. Price added. Henry Mills works at Blackwood's bank. He's been keeping his own records, I think. If I can convince him to come forward." "That's dangerous," Jacob warned. "If Blackwood finds out you're talking to his people, then I'd better be quick about it." Dr. Price smiled grimly. "I've been afraid long enough. Time to remember what courage feels like." Within minutes they were gone, riding hard toward town, as the winter sun began its descent toward the horizon. Clara watched them go, then turned to find Jacob organizing their defenses with military precision. He directed Samuel to reinforce the window shutters, showed Elijah where to stack ammunition, checked every weapon in the house with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," Clara observed. "Prepared for a siege." "More times than I can count." Jacob didn't look up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Never thought I'd be doing it again. Never wanted to. But here you are." Now he did look at her, and something in his eyes made Clara's breath catch. "Here I am." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Then Noah tugged at Jacob's sleeve, breaking the spell. "Mr. Mercer, are the bad men going to kill us?" Jacob knelt again, putting himself at eye level with the frightened boy. "Not if I can help it." "But there's so many of them, and you're just one person." "I'm not alone." Jacob glanced at Clara, then back at Noah. "I've got your mama, who's the bravest woman I've ever met. I've got your brothers, who are tough as nails. And I've got you, who can see things nobody else can see." He put a hand on Noah's shoulder. "That makes us stronger than any army Blackwood can buy." Noah considered this seriously. Then his small face lit up with a smile. "I saw something else," he said. "In my dreams last night. After all the scary parts." "What did you see?" "Snow." Noah's voice was wondering. "Lots of snow falling on everything, and everybody standing together, and Mama was smiling, really smiling like she used to before Papa died." He looked at Jacob with those strange, knowing eyes. "You were there too, holding her hand." Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. Jacob cleared his throat, looking almost as flustered as she felt. "Well," he said gruffly, "let's make sure that dream comes true then." He stood and returned to his preparations, but Clara noticed his hands weren't quite steady. Hours passed. The sun sank lower. Samuel kept watch at the window, reporting every sound, every movement in the gathering dusk. Elijah sat with his back against the wall, drawing something on his slate with fierce concentration. When Clara looked over his shoulder, she saw he'd sketched the cabin surrounded by figures, some attacking, some defending. "Which ones are we?" she asked softly. "These." Elijah pointed to the small cluster around the cabin's door. "And these are the people coming to help." He'd drawn more figures arriving from the east, their forms rough but clearly moving toward the defenders. "You think they'll come, the townspeople?" Elijah nodded. "They're tired of being scared. I can see it in their faces when I watch them in town. They want someone to be brave first. And that someone is us. That someone is you, Mama." Elijah looked up at her with those dark, observant eyes. "You and Mr. Mercer. You're showing them it's possible." Clara hugged her middle son, marveling at the wisdom in his young heart. Thomas had been like this too, she remembered. Quiet, watchful, understanding things, without needing them, explained. "I love you," she whispered against his hair. "I know." Elijah returned the embrace briefly, then pulled back with a hint of a smile. "I love you too. Now let me finish my drawing." The first riders appeared just after sunset. "They're coming," Samuel called, his voice tight with fear. "From town, lots of them." Clara's heart seized. Had Blackwood already mobilized? Were they too late? But Jacob was at the window, squinting into the fading light. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Ezekiel," he said, "and he's not alone." Clara joined him at the window and felt tears spring to her eyes. Behind Ezekiel rode the Miller family, all 5 of them. Behind them came the Wilson brothers, grim-faced and armed. Behind them, more faces. She didn't recognize men and women from the outlying farms. People who had suffered under Blackwood's reign and were finally ready to fight back. And at the rear of the column, riding beside Dr. Price, was a thin, nervous-looking man Clara recognized from the bank. "Henry Mills," Jacob murmured. She actually convinced him. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold air. Ezekiel dismounted first, his dark face split with a rare grin. "Told you they'd come," he said. Once word got out that someone was finally standing up to Blackwood, people couldn't volunteer fast enough. Frank Miller stepped forward, a grizzled man in his 50s, with hard eyes and a harder jaw. "Mrs. Jennings, I knew your husband. He was a good man, didn't deserve what happened to him." "No," Clara agreed. "He didn't. Well, we're here to make sure it doesn't happen to you or those boys." Miller jerked his thumb over his shoulder. 23 of us all told. More coming when they can slip away without being noticed." Clara looked at the assembled group, these strangers who had ridden through the cold and dark to defend a woman they barely knew. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk yourselves for me?" It was one of the women who answered, a weathered farmer's wife with steel-gray hair and fierce eyes. "Because we're sick of being afraid, Mrs. Jennings. Sick of watching Blackwood take whatever he wants while we cower and pray he doesn't come for us next." She dismounted and walked up to Clara, taking her hands. "You stood on your porch last night and told Harrison's men to go to hell. That took more courage than this whole town's shown in 10 years. Least we can do is stand with you now." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't find words for the gratitude and hope swelling in her chest. Jacob stepped forward, taking charge with the natural authority of a man born to lead. "All right, listen up. Blackwood's coming tonight, probably with every gun he can muster. We need to set up defensive positions, establish lines of fire, make sure nobody can approach this cabin without us seeing them." The group listened intently as Jacob outlined his plan. Men were assigned positions around the property. Women who could shoot were given rifles and stationed at windows. Those who couldn't were set to loading weapons and tending any wounded. Through it all, Clara moved among them, offering water-checking weapons, thanking each person who had come. Her boys stayed close, Samuel and Elijah helping where they could. Noah clutching his wooden horse and watching everything with wide, knowing eyes. "Mama!" The youngest tugged at her sleeve as full darkness fell. "They're coming. I can feel them. Lots of anger coming this way." Clara knelt beside her son. "How long do we have?" Noah's face scrunched with concentration. "Soon. Very soon." His eyes flew open, bright with fear. "Mama, the man with the white hair isn't just angry. He's scared. Scared people do terrible things." Clara gathered him into her arms. "Whatever happens, you stay in the cellar with your brothers. Promise me." "But I want to help. I can tell you what they're feeling, where they're going to attack." "You can do that from the cellar. Keep the trapdoor cracked. Tell Samuel everything you see." She kissed his forehead. "You've already helped more than you know, sweetheart. Now it's time to let the grown-ups handle the rest." Jacob appeared at her shoulder. "It's time. Get the boys hidden." Clara nodded, herding her sons toward the trapdoor. Samuel went first, rifle in hand, his young face set with determination. Elijah followed, silent as always, but he paused at the edge to look back at his mother. "We'll be okay," he said quietly. "I saw it in my drawing. All of us together at the end, safe." Clara couldn't answer past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded and watched her middle son disappear into the darkness below. Noah was last. Before he climbed down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden horse Thomas had carved for him. "Papa's watching," he said. "I can feel him too. He says he loves us, and he says—" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "He says Mr. Mercer is a good man. He says it's okay." Then he was gone, the trapdoor closing behind him, leaving Clara standing in the middle of the cabin with tears streaming down her face. "Clara." Jacob's voice was gentle. She wiped her eyes and turned to face him. "I'm ready." You don't have to be out there. You could stay with the boys, keep them calm. No. Clara picked up her rifle. I started this. I'm going to finish it. Jacob held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, something like pride in his eyes. All right then. He handed her a box of ammunition. Let's go end this. They stepped out onto the porch together into the cold night air. All around the property, defenders crouched behind cover weapons, ready faces taut with anticipation. From the darkness to the east came the sound Clara had been dreading. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Coming fast. Torches appeared through the trees, a river of fire flowing toward them. And at its head, his white hair gleaming in the torchlight, rode Cornelius Blackwood. The final confrontation had begun. Blackwood's riders halted 50 yards from the cabin, their torches casting dancing shadows across the snow-covered yard. Clara counted at least 30 men, maybe more, their faces hidden behind bandanas or lost in darkness. At their head, Cornelius Blackwood sat astride a magnificent black horse, his white hair gleaming like a crown in the firelight. Even at this distance, Clara could see the cold fury in his pale eyes. Beside him rode Sheriff Harrison Badge, catching the torchlight hand resting on his holstered pistol. Well, well, Blackwood's voice carried easily across the frozen ground. It seems the widow has found some friends. Jacob stepped forward, positioning himself at the edge of the porch. Turn around, Blackwood. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. On that we agree. Blackwood's smile was thin as a knife's edge. Hand over the woman and her brats, surrender any documents you've collected, and everyone else can go home to their families. Not going to happen. Blackwood's smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Mercer. A fatal one. Wouldn't be my first. Jacob's hand moved to his gun belt. But I'm still standing. Can't say the same for the men who underestimated me. A murmur ran through Blackwood's riders. Several of them shifted uneasily in their saddles. You're outnumbered, Harrison called out. 3 to 1, maybe more. What do you think you're going to accomplish here? Justice. The word came not from Jacob, but from Dr. Price, who stepped out from behind a nearby wagon. Something this valley hasn't seen in a long time. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Adelaide, I should have known you'd be involved in this foolishness. Foolishness! Dr. Price's voice shook with barely contained rage. You murdered my son Cornelius. Murdered him because he wouldn't sell you a worthless piece of land. Marcus died in a mining accident. The coroner's report was quite clear. The coroner's report was written by a man you owned just like you own everything else in this valley. Dr. Price pulled a sheaf of papers from her coat. But I kept my own records. Every suspicious death, every convenient accident, every grieving family too afraid to ask questions. She held the papers high. It's all here. Enough to hang you twice over. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in Blackwood's eyes. He glanced at Harrison, who looked equally unsettled. Those records mean nothing, Blackwood said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The word of a bitter old woman against a respected businessman. How about the word of your own accountant? Henry Mills stepped out from the shadows, his thin frame trembling, but his voice steady. I have the financial records, Mr. Blackwood. Every payment to Sheriff Harrison after a convenient death. Every bribe to county officials. Every forged document. He swallowed hard. I've been keeping copies for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use them. The murmur among Blackwood's men grew louder. Clara saw several of them exchange worried glances. You treacherous little worm. Blackwood's composure finally cracked. After everything I've done for you. Done for me? Mills's voice rose with sudden anger. You made me complicit in murder. Made me sign off on deaths I knew weren't accidents. I haven't slept through the night in years because of what you forced me to do. He straightened his thin shoulders. No more. Tonight it ends. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. He turned to his men, his voice rising to a shout. Are you going to let these people make fools of us? Are you going to let a witch and a washed-up lawman destroy everything we've built? But his men weren't moving. If anything, they were pulling back, creating distance between themselves and their employer. Mr. Blackwood. One of the riders pushed forward, removing his bandana to reveal a young face barely out of boyhood. Some of us didn't sign up for this. We came to evict a squatter, not fight a war. You'll do what I pay you to do. Not this. The young man shook his head. My pa always said there's no amount of money worth selling your soul for. I reckon I finally understand what he meant. He turned his horse and rode away into the darkness. After a moment, 2 more riders followed. Then 3 more. Clara watched in disbelief as Blackwood's army began to melt away, men slipping into the night like shadows fleeing the dawn. Cowards! Blackwood screamed. Every last one of you cowards. No Cornelius. Jacob's voice was calm, almost gentle. They're just men who finally realized what they were fighting for, and what they were fighting against. Blackwood wheeled on him, his face twisted with fury. You think this changes anything? I own this valley. I own the bank, the mine, the courts. Even if you survive tonight, I'll destroy you. All of you. I'll burn your homes, ruin your businesses, see your children starve in the streets. You'll try. Clara stepped forward to stand beside Jacob, her rifle steady in her hands. But you'll fail, because we're not afraid of you anymore. Something in Blackwood seemed to snap. He drew a pistol from his coat, leveling it at Clara. If I can't have this land, he snarled, neither will you. 3 things happened at once. Harrison lunged forward, shoving Blackwood's arm just as the gun fired. The bullet went wide, shattering a window somewhere behind Clara. Jacob drew and fired in one fluid motion, hitting Blackwood's gun hand. The pistol flew away into the snow. And from beneath the cabin through the cracked trapdoor came Noah's voice. Mama? The sheriff isn't bad. He's trying to help. Time seemed to freeze. Blackwood clutched his wounded hand, screaming in pain and rage. Harrison sat frozen on his horse, his gun still holstered, his face a mask of conflict. Harrison! Jacob's voice cut through the chaos. It's over. You know it's over. The sheriff's eyes moved from Blackwood to Jacob to Clara. In them, Clara saw something she never expected: guilt. Deep, crushing guilt. I killed your husband. Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. Pushed him off Echo Ridge when he refused to sell. Clara's grip tightened on her rifle. Her finger found the trigger. I know, she said. He begged me not to. Harrison's face crumpled. Said his boys needed him. Said you needed him. A tear tracked down his weathered cheek. I did it anyway. Because Blackwood told me to. Because I was afraid of what he'd do to me if I refused. Why are you telling me this now? Harrison looked at her with empty eyes. Because I'm tired, Mrs. Jennings. Tired of being afraid. Tired of doing terrible things for terrible men. He slowly drew his pistol, and for a heartbeat Clara thought he was going to shoot her. Instead, he turned the gun around and held it out handle first. I'm done, he said. Whatever happens to me now, I'm done. Jacob moved forward carefully, taking the gun from Harrison's unresisting hand. Get off your horse, slowly. Harrison dismounted and stood in the snow. His hands raised, his head bowed. Around them, what remained of Blackwood's men watched in stunned silence. This is insane. Blackwood spat, still cradling his wounded hand. Harrison, what are you doing? We had a deal. The deal's off, Cornelius. Harrison didn't look at his former employer. It's been off for a long time. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. You spineless... Enough! Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. Cornelius Blackwood, you're under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, and enough other crimes to keep the territorial court busy for years. You have no authority here. I have the authority of 30 witnesses who just watched you try to murder an unarmed woman. Jacob gestured to the assembled townspeople. I have the authority of records and documents proving your crimes, and I have the authority of a badge I never should have put down." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old marshal's badge, tarnished but still gleaming in the torchlight. "This badge doesn't give me the right to make arrests anymore," Jacob said. "But it reminds me of an oath I took, to protect the innocent, to pursue justice, to stand against evil even when it wears a respectable face." He pinned the badge to his coat. "Tonight I'm keeping that oath." Frank Miller stepped forward, rope in hand. "Reckon we should tie these two up before they cause any more trouble." "Hold on." Clara moved toward Harrison, her rifle still raised. Every eye watched her as she approached the man who had murdered her husband. "Mrs. Jennings." Harrison's voice was broken. "I know there's nothing I can say." "You're right. There isn't." Clara stopped inches from him, close enough to see the tears tracking through the dust on his face. "You took my children's father. You took my husband. You took everything. I know. I should kill you right now. No jury in the territory would convict me." Harrison closed his eyes. "You'd be within your rights." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. She thought of Thomas, of his smile, his laugh, the way he'd held her on cold nights. She thought of Samuel trying to be a man at 11, of Elijah's silence, of Noah's nightmares. She thought of putting a bullet through the heart of the man who had caused all of it. And then she thought of what Thomas would say, what he would want. "Open your eyes," she commanded. Harrison obeyed. "My husband was a good man," Clara said. "Better than you. Better than Blackwood. Better than anyone in this godforsaken valley." Her voice shook but didn't break. "He believed in justice. Real justice. The kind that comes from courts and laws, not from guns in the night." She lowered her rifle. "I won't kill you, Harrison. Not because you deserve mercy. You don't. But because my boys are watching, and I won't teach them that revenge is the same as justice." Harrison let out a shuddering breath. "Mrs. Jennings, but you will answer for what you've done. You'll stand trial. You'll face the families of everyone you've hurt. And you'll spend the rest of your miserable life knowing that a woman you called cursed showed you more grace than you ever deserved." She turned her back on him and walked toward the cabin, her legs trembling but her head held high. Behind her, Frank Miller and the Wilson brothers moved forward to secure the prisoners. Blackwood cursed and struggled. Harrison went quietly, his head bowed in defeat. Clara made it to the porch before her knees gave out. Jacob caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping around her, holding her up. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you. It's over. You're safe." Clara buried her face in his chest, shaking with the aftermath of everything. The fear, the rage, the terrible temptation to pull that trigger. All of it came pouring out in great racking sobs. "Mama!" The trapdoor flew open, and 3 small bodies came hurtling across the cabin, throwing themselves at Clara. She gathered them in her arms, holding them so tight it hurt. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. We're okay." Samuel was crying, actually crying for the first time since his father's funeral. Elijah clung to her like he'd never let go. And Noah. Noah looked up at Jacob with those strange, knowing eyes and smiled. "I told you," he said. "I told you he'd save us." Jacob's expression softened. He started to step back to give the family their moment of reunion, but Clara caught his hand. "Stay," she said. "Please." He stayed. The night stretched on as order was restored. Blackwood and Harrison were secured in the back of a wagon, guarded by a rotating shift of armed townspeople. Dr. Price tended to Blackwood's wounded hand with perfunctory efficiency, showing him no more consideration than she would have shown a rabid dog. Henry Mills sat by the fire, looking shell-shocked but relieved. Years of guilt were written in the lines of his face, but so was something else. Hope, maybe. Or the beginnings of peace. "What happens now?" Ezekiel asked as the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. "We take them to the territorial capital," Jacob said. "Put them in front of a real judge, Not one of Blackwood's puppets. That's a 3-day ride, and we don't have the authority to hold them. We've got 30 witnesses to attempted murder and enough documentation to paper a courthouse. Jacob looked at the assembled group. If anyone tries to stop us, they'll have to go through all of us. Frank Miller spat into the snow. Let them try. Been waiting years to see Blackwood get what's coming to him. One of the Wilson brothers nodded. We'll ride escort. Make sure the bastard gets to trial in one piece. As the townspeople organized the transport, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the land Thomas had died for. The snow was pink with dawn light, beautiful and peaceful, as if the violence of the night had never happened. You should rest. Jacob's voice came from behind her. It's been a long night. I can't. Clara shook her head. Too much running through my mind. Jacob came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You did something incredible tonight. Standing down Harrison like that, choosing justice over revenge. Not many people could have done that. I almost didn't. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I wanted to kill him, Jacob. I wanted it so badly I could taste it. But you didn't. No. She finally turned to look at him. Because I thought about what you said. About some things being worth fighting for, even when you might lose. And I realized that if I killed Harrison in cold blood, I'd lose something more important than revenge. What's that? Myself. Clara's eyes glistened. The woman Thomas married, the mother my boys need. She took a shaky breath. The person I want to be. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. Thomas was right about you, he said softly. When he told Harrison his boys needed him, that you needed him. He was right, but he was wrong about one thing. What? He thought you couldn't survive without him. Jacob's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. But here you are, surviving, fighting, winning. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I don't feel like I'm winning. I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what winning feels like most of the time. Jacob's voice was rough with emotion. Just barely holding on until things get better. Do they get better? Jacob looked at her, really looked at her with eyes that had seen too much loss and carried too much pain. I didn't think so. For 3 years I didn't think anything would ever be better. I was just existing, waiting for death to catch up with me. What changed? You. The word was simple, direct, devastating. You and those boys. Watching you fight for your family, refuse to give up even when everything was against you. It reminded me what it felt like to care about something, to want to protect something. Clara's heart was pounding. Jacob, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. It's too soon, I know that. You're still grieving, and I'm still broken, and this isn't the time. Jacob. Clara squeezed his hand, stopping the flood of words. I know it's too soon. I know we're both damaged and scared and carrying more grief than any two people should have to bear. But I also know that you're the reason my children are still alive, the reason I'm still alive. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him, despite the cold morning air. And I know that when Noah had his dream about the future, about all of us standing in the snow together, safe and happy, you were there, holding my hand, just like this. Jacob's breath caught. Your boys' dreams aren't always right. No, but they haven't been wrong yet. They stood there as the sun crept higher, hands intertwined, watching the valley emerge from the darkness of the longest night. Around them, the townspeople moved and murmured, loading prisoners, dousing fires, beginning the work of rebuilding what Blackwood had tried to destroy. But for this one moment, none of that existed. Just two wounded souls finding unexpected solace in each other. We should go inside, Clara finally said. The boys will be worried. Jacob nodded, but didn't release her hand. Clara. Yes. Whatever happens next, whatever comes of all this, I want you to know something. His voice was rough, almost breaking. "Meeting you was the first good thing that's happened to me in 3 years, and I don't intend to let it go." Clara smiled, the first real smile she'd felt since Thomas's death. "Neither do I." They walked back to the cabin together, hands still joined as the new day broke over Silver Creek Valley. Inside, they found the boys asleep in a pile by the fire, exhausted by the night's events. Samuel had one arm around each of his brothers, protective even in sleep. Noah clutched his wooden horse, a peaceful smile on his small face. Clara knelt beside them, brushing hair from each forehead, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "They're strong kids," Jacob said softly, standing at her shoulder. "They had a strong father." Clara looked up at him. "And now they have you." Jacob's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. He didn't need them. Some things went deeper than language. Outside, the sun rose higher, burning away the shadows of the night. Somewhere in the valley, a rooster crowed. A dog barked. The normal sounds of morning returning to a world that had nearly been consumed by darkness. But in the cabin, surrounded by sleeping children and tentative hope, Clara Jennings and Jacob Mercer sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance, saying nothing. There would be time for words later. For now, it was enough to simply be alive, to simply be together, to simply be home. 3 weeks passed before the trial began. Clara stood outside the territorial courthouse in Denver, her 3 sons pressed close against the winter chill. The journey had been long and difficult, 3 days of rough roads and cold nights. But they had made it, all of them. Jacob stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring as it had been every day since that terrible night. He hadn't left her side through any of it. Not the endless questions from territorial marshals, not the newspaper reporters who had descended on Silver Creek like vultures, not the sleepless nights when Clara woke screaming from nightmares about fire and gunshots. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low. Clara looked at the courthouse doors, knowing what waited inside. Blackwood and Harrison shackled and pale after weeks in custody, lawyers and judges and witnesses. The truth finally about what had happened to Thomas. "No," she admitted. "But I'm going anyway." The courtroom was packed. News of Blackwood's arrest had spread across the territory like wildfire. People had traveled from as far as Kansas to witness the trial of one of Colorado's most powerful men. Clara found a seat near the front, her boys crowded around her. Dr. Price sat on her other side, her weathered face grim with determination. Behind them, Ezekiel Brown, Frank Miller, the Wilson brothers, and dozens of others who had stood with them that night. When Blackwood was led in chains, rattling with every step, a murmur ran through the crowd. The man who had terrorized Silver Creek for a decade looked diminished, somehow smaller. His white hair was unkempt, his expensive clothes wrinkled, but his eyes still held that cold fury Clara remembered. Harrison came next, his head bowed, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. He moved like a man already dead, going through motions that no longer held meaning. The judge, a stern-faced man named William Foster, called the court to order. "This court convenes to hear the case of the Territory of Colorado versus Cornelius Blackwood and Wade Harrison," he announced. "The defendants stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, destruction of public records, and numerous other charges." What followed was hours of testimony. Henry Mills took the stand first, his thin frame shaking, but his voice clear, as he described years of financial manipulation. Every payment to Harrison, every forged document, every convenient accident that had expanded Blackwood's empire. Dr. Price followed her medical records, painting a picture of death that extended far beyond Thomas Jennings. 5 people in 10 years, all found dead in suspicious circumstances, all owning land Blackwood wanted. "Marcus Price," she said, her voice breaking on her son's name. "Thomas Jennings, Harold Patterson, James Wilson, Robert Jenkins." She looked directly at Blackwood. "You killed them all, and you would have killed Clara Jennings and her children too, if not for the courage of one good man." Clara felt Jacob tense beside her. He wasn't comfortable with praise she had learned. Didn't see himself as good, despite everything he had done. When it was her turn to testify, Clara walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She told them everything. Thomas's discovery of the silver vein, his refusal to sell, her premonitions about his death, the threats from Harrison the night attack, the final confrontation. "Mrs. Jennings," the prosecutor asked, "you claim to have had dreams predicting your husband's death. Do you expect this court to believe that—" Clara met his eyes steadily. "I expect this court to believe the evidence. The journal entries, the financial records, the testimony of dozens of witnesses. My dreams are my own business. The truth is everyone's." A ripple of approval went through the crowd. The defense lawyers tried their best to discredit the testimony, to paint Clara as a delusional woman seeking revenge, to portray Blackwood as a legitimate businessman, unfairly targeted. But the evidence was overwhelming, and they knew it. On the third day, Harrison asked to address the court. His lawyers tried to stop him. Blackwood's lawyers objected vociferously, but Judge Foster's curiosity, evident in his eyes, allowed it. Harrison stood slowly, his chains clinking in the silent courtroom. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, the voice of a man who had given up on everything. "I killed Thomas Jennings," he said. "Pushed him off Echo Ridge on Cornelius Blackwood's orders." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. "I killed the others too," Harrison continued, ignoring the chaos. "Patterson, Wilson, Jenkins, Price." His eyes found Dr. Price in the crowd. "I killed your boy, ma'am. Made it look like an accident. Told myself I didn't have a choice." Dr. Price's face was pale as death, but she didn't look away. "But there's always a choice." Harrison's voice cracked. "I just kept making the wrong one, because Blackwood paid well, and because I was afraid of what he'd do to me if I refused." He turned to face Clara. "Mrs. Jennings, I know there's nothing I can say that will make up for what I took from you. Your husband was a good man. He died begging me to spare him, not for his own sake, but because he knew you and those boys needed him." Tears streamed down Harrison's face. "I didn't listen, and I've hated myself every day since." Clara sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Jacob's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. "I'm confessing because I want this over," Harrison said. "I want Blackwood to pay for what he made me do, and I want those families to know the truth, even if it damns me." He turned back to the judge. "I'm guilty, Your Honor, of everything and more. Do with me what you will." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Foster stared at Harrison for a long moment. Then he turned to the jury. "In light of this confession and the overwhelming evidence presented, I am prepared to render judgment without further deliberation, unless the jury objects." The jury foreman, a grizzled rancher with hard eyes, shook his head. "No objection, Your Honor. We've heard enough." Judge Foster nodded. "Very well. Cornelius Blackwood, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, fraud, and destruction of evidence. You are sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in the territorial prison with no possibility of parole." Blackwood's face went purple with rage. "This is an outrage. I demand an appeal. I demand—" "You demand nothing." Judge Foster's voice was ice. "You are a murderer and a thief hiding behind money and respectability. Your reign of terror ends today." He turned to Harrison. "Wade Harrison, in light of your confession and cooperation, your sentence is reduced to 15 years. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none to spare." Harrison simply nodded, accepting his fate. As the prisoners were led away, Blackwood suddenly lunged toward Clara, straining against his chains. "This isn't over, witch," he screamed. "I'll get out. I'll come for you. I'll burn everything you love." Jacob was on his feet, instantly placing himself between Blackwood and Clara. "You won't get the chance." The guards dragged Blackwood away, his curses echoing through the marble halls until they faded into silence. Clara sat very still, her heart pounding. Then slowly, the tension drained from her body. It was over. Finally, truly over. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with excited chatter. Reporters rushed to file their stories. Townspeople embraced, laughing and crying with relief. But Clara just sat, holding Jacob's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Mama." Samuel's voice was uncertain. "Are you okay?" Clara pulled her eldest son into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm okay. We're all okay." Elijah and Noah piled on, the four of them, huddled together in a tangle of arms and tears. "Papa got justice," Elijah said quietly. "The bad men are going to prison." "Yes." Clara kissed her middle son's forehead. "Papa got justice." Noah looked up at Jacob, who stood slightly apart, giving the family their moment. "You helped," the boy said. "You helped Papa get justice." Jacob crouched down to Noah's level. "Your mama did most of it. She's the bravest person I know." "She is," Noah agreed. Then, with the simple certainty of childhood, "But you helped, and you're going to keep helping. Forever." Clara saw Jacob's throat work as he swallowed hard. "If your mama will let me," he said softly. Noah grinned. "She will. I already saw it." Spring came to Silver Creek Valley like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing earth rich with possibility. Streams ran clear and cold from the mountains. The first wildflowers began to push through the softening ground. And on the Jennings property, now legally secured with a proper deed filed at the territorial office, a celebration was underway. The cabin had been expanded over the winter months, a new wing added with rooms for each of the boys. A proper barn stood where the lean-to used to be, housing 2 horses and a milk cow. A vegetable garden stretched behind the house, already planted with seeds that would feed them through the coming year. But today wasn't about the land or the buildings. Today was about something else entirely. Clara stood in the small church in Silver Creek, her heart racing as fast as it had during the confrontation with Blackwood, but for very different reasons. She wore a dress of pale blue, the first new clothing she'd owned in years. Wildflowers were woven into her hair. At the altar, Jacob waited. He wore a clean white shirt and his best coat, the old marshal's badge pinned over his heart. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his eyes that held Clara transfixed, filled with wonder and hope, and something that looked very much like joy. Samuel walked his mother down the aisle, his young face solemn with the weight of the responsibility. Behind them came Elijah and Noah, each carrying a small bouquet of spring flowers. The church was packed. Everyone from Silver Creek had come along with people from neighboring valleys who had heard the story of the widow who stood against a tyrant. Dr. Price sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Ezekiel Brown stood at the back, his dark face split with a rare smile. The Millers, the Wilsons, Henry Mills, and dozens of others filled every available space. When Clara reached the altar, Samuel placed her hand in Jacob's, then stepped back to join his brothers. "Take care of her," the boy said quietly, "or you'll answer to me." Jacob met Samuel's eyes with perfect seriousness. "I know, and I will." The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional. But when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, it was Noah who spoke up. "Nobody better object," the boy announced loudly. "I already saw them married. It's supposed to happen." Laughter rippled through the congregation. Even Clara, tears streaming down her face, couldn't help but smile. "Then I suppose we'd better get on with it," the minister said, his eyes twinkling. When Jacob kissed his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing joy spilling out of every corner of the small community. Children ran between the tables, shrieking with laughter. Old men told stories, and young couples stole kisses behind the church. Clara moved through it all in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations, laughing at jokes she barely heard, holding Jacob's hand, like an anchor to reality. At one point, she found herself standing alone by the church window, looking out at the valley she had almost died to protect. "Mrs. Mercer." Clara turned to find Dr. Price approaching, a glass of punch in each hand. Mrs. Mercer. Clara tried out the name, still unfamiliar on her tongue. It sounds strange. It sounds right. Adelaide handed her a glass. Thomas would approve, you know. Of Jacob. Of all of this. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You think so? I know so. The older woman's voice was firm. Thomas wanted you happy. Wanted his boys cared for. Jacob Mercer is a good man who loves your children like his own. She raised her glass. Thomas would be grateful. I miss him. The words came out before Clara could stop them. Every day I miss him. Of course you do. You always will. Adelaide's eyes held the wisdom of her own grief, her own loss. But missing someone doesn't mean you can't love again. The heart is bigger than we give it credit for. Clara nodded, unable to speak. Now, Adelaide's voice turned brisk. Your new husband is looking for you, and there's dancing to be done. No more tears today. She bustled away, leaving Clara smiling despite herself. Jacob found her a moment later, his face flushed from dancing with an enthusiastic group of local women who had been determined to claim his attention. Finally escaped, he said, slightly breathless. Mrs. Patterson can waltz like nobody's business. Clara laughed. Poor thing, cornered by a 70-year-old widow. 3 70-year-old widows. They were tag-teaming me. Jacob's eyes softened as he looked at her. You okay? You disappeared. Just thinking. About Thomas. Clara took his hand. And you. And how strange life is, that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to one of the best. Jacob's thumb traced circles on her palm, the way it had become habit to do. I've been thinking too. About what? About second chances. He glanced toward the window, toward the valley spread out below. 5 years ago, I came to this place to die. Figured I'd just wait until the guilt and grief finished what the bullet in Kansas started. Clara squeezed his hand. But then I saw a woman on a half-built cabin roof fighting to make a home for her children. And I thought if she can keep going after everything she's lost, maybe I can too. He turned back to her, his eyes bright. You saved me, Clara. Long before I ever saved you. Jacob, I'm not good with words. He rushed on before she could interrupt. Never have been. But I need you to know that whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, I'm not going anywhere. This family is my family now. This home is my home. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you've placed in me. Clara reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You're already worthy, she said. You have been since the first day you showed up at my door, offering to fix my roof. She kissed him, then not caring who was watching, not caring about propriety or gossip, just 2 broken people who had somehow found their way to each other. When they pulled apart, they found 3 small faces watching them with varying expressions. Samuel looked slightly embarrassed, but pleased. Elijah wore a small, satisfied smile. And Noah was beaming like the sun had risen just for him. I told you, the boy said smugly. I told you he was going to help us. I told you we'd be a family. Jacob knelt down to the boy's level, as he always did when speaking to any of the children. You did tell us, he agreed. And you were right about everything. I know. Noah's voice held no arrogance, just simple certainty. I see things. You do. Jacob reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. And I'm grateful for it. Your gift brought us together. It's not just my gift. Noah looked at his mother. Mama has it too. She just sees the scary parts. I see the good parts. Clara felt her breath catch. It was the first time Noah had articulated their shared ability so clearly. Maybe you balance each other out, Jacob suggested. Warning and hope, fear and courage. Noah considered this seriously. Maybe. But I think it's more than that." He looked between his mother and new father with those strange, knowing eyes. "I think the gift shows us what we need to see when we need to see it, so we can make the right choices." Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. Wisdom beyond years wrapped in a child's simple words. "Well," Jacob said, standing and offering Clara his hand. "Whatever the reason, I'm glad you saw what you saw, all of you." He gathered the whole family into his arms. Clara, Samuel, Elijah, and Noah, holding them tight as the celebration continued around them. "What happens now, Pa?" Samuel asked, the word still new, but growing more comfortable each time he used it. Jacob looked at Clara, and she saw her own hopes reflected in his eyes. "Now," he said, "we live." Summer brought growth. The garden flourished. The silver mine on the Jennings, now Mercer property, began operations under fair practices, the profits shared among all who had suffered under Blackwood's regime. Samuel learned to ride properly, becoming Jacob's shadow on the daily rounds of their expanded property. Elijah discovered a talent for drawing, filling endless pages with sketches of the valley he loved. And Noah, strange and wonderful. Noah continued to see glimpses of what might be guiding his family through small challenges with quiet certainty. Autumn brought harvest. Clara canned vegetables and preserved fruit, filling the root cellar with provisions for the coming winter. Jacob and Samuel worked side by side, bringing in hay, repairing fences, preparing the animals for the cold months ahead. The cabin, once half-built and desperate, now stood solid and warm, filled with the sounds of a family thriving. Winter brought peace. Not the cruel, life-threatening winters Clara remembered from her first months in the valley, but soft, quiet seasons of rest. Snow fell gently on the expanded homestead. Fires crackled in stone hearths. And in the evenings, the Mercer family gathered together, reading stories, playing games, simply being together in ways Clara had once thought impossible. One evening, as the first anniversary of Thomas's death approached, Clara found herself standing alone at his grave. The wooden marker had been replaced with proper stone, his name and dates carved deep into the granite. Someone Jacob, she suspected, had planted wildflowers around the base, now dormant, but ready to bloom again in spring. "I miss you," Clara said softly. "Every day I miss you. The boys are growing so fast, Thomas. Samuel's almost as tall as me now. Elijah's found his voice again, talks more than ever. And Noah—" She smiled through her tears. "Noah is exactly the person you always said he'd be. Special. Remarkable." She knelt in the snow, not caring about the cold. "I found someone. Jacob. You'd like him, I think. He's strong and good, and he loves our boys like they're his own blood." She touched the stone. "He doesn't try to replace you. Nobody could. He just fits in the spaces you left behind." The wind whispered through the pines, soft and almost warm despite the winter chill. "I'm happy, Thomas. For the first time since you died, I'm actually happy. And I need you to know that being happy doesn't mean I've forgotten you. Doesn't mean I love you any less." Her voice broke. "It just means I'm finally living again, the way you'd want me to." She stayed there for a long time, tears freezing on her cheeks, heart full of grief and gratitude in equal measure. When she finally rose, Jacob was waiting at the edge of the clearing. He didn't approach, didn't intrude, just stood there, letting her know he was close if she needed him. Clara walked to him and took his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding. Always." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Ready to go home?" Clara looked back at Thomas's grave one last time, then forward to the cabin where her children waited. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They walked home together as the snow began to fall soft and silent, covering the world in white. Years later, when people spoke of Clara Mercer, they told her story with reverence. The widow who had faced down a tyrant. The mother who had protected her children against impossible odds. The woman who had found love again in the ashes of tragedy. But Clara knew the truth was simpler than the legends made it seem. She had been afraid, broken, desperate. She had made mistakes and nearly given in to hatred. She had been saved by the kindness of a stranger who became something more, and by the courage of ordinary people who finally decided to stand up for what was right. There was no magic to it. No special power that set her apart. Just stubborn determination to survive, fierce love for her children, and the willingness to trust when trust seemed impossible. These were things anyone could have. Things everyone possessed if only they knew where to look. On the last page of her journal years after the trial, Clara wrote, "To whoever reads these words after I'm gone, life will break you. It breaks everyone. The question isn't whether you'll fall, but whether you'll get back up. Whether you'll let tragedy define you or let it refine you." I was a widow with 3 sons, and nothing but a half-built cabin and a dead husband's dream. I should have died that first winter. Instead, I found something I never expected. I found home. Not just a place, not just a family, but a sense of belonging that no one could take from me, no matter how hard they tried. If you're reading this and you're broken, know this: you can be whole again. If you're alone, you can find your people. If you're afraid, you can find courage. You just have to keep going, keep fighting, keep believing that better days are possible, even when everything suggests otherwise. That's what I did. And it made all the difference. With love and hope, Clara Jennings Mercer, Silver Creek Valley, Colorado, 1895. The journal was found decades later tucked into a cedar chest in the attic of the Mercer homestead. By then, Clara and Jacob had both passed, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. The cabin still stood, expanded over the years into a sprawling ranch house that dominated the valley. The silver mine had made the family wealthy, but they had used their fortune wisely, building schools and hospitals and churches throughout the territory. Samuel became a lawyer fighting for justice the way his mother had taught him. Elijah became an artist whose paintings of the Old West hung in galleries across the country. And Noah, strange, wonderful Noah, became a doctor using his gift to sense what his patients needed in ways that defied medical explanation. They all had families of their own. They all told their children the story of the widow who refused to give up and the cowboy who found redemption in protecting her. And every year on the anniversary of their parents' wedding, the Mercer descendants gathered at the old homestead to celebrate. They came from across the country, doctors and lawyers and teachers and ranchers, all united by blood and by the legacy of 2 people who had chosen love over fear, justice over revenge, hope over despair. The story of Clara and Jacob Mercer became legend, passed down through generations like a precious heirloom. It changed in the telling, of course, the way all stories do. But the heart of it remained true. A widow found hope when all seemed lost. A broken man found purpose in protecting her. Together they built something that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the silver in the ground, not the battles fought, or the enemies defeated. Just love, persistent and stubborn, refusing to surrender even in the darkest hour. Love was the inheritance they left behind. Love was what remained. The snow fell gently over Silver Creek Valley, covering the world in white, peaceful and eternal. And somewhere in the wind, if you listened closely, you could almost hear Clara's voice whispering the words that had carried her through the worst of times. "You're home now. You're finally home."